Hello and welcome to another real-world data science interview. I'm Brian Tarrant, and today I'm joined by Heidi Seibold, a statistician and data scientist. I invited Heidi along to speak about open science, what it means, the benefits of it, and how to move towards it. So welcome, Heidi. How are you?
Hello, thanks for having me. I'm good.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Heidi, I contacted you because I know you have a real deep interest in open science, and the conversation I think was really motivated by the White House Office of Science and Technology policy uh, declaring 2023 to be the year of open science. So, first off, I wanted to get your reaction to that announcement.
Yeah, I think in general that's a really cool thing for open science to happen, right? There's this movement that's been going on for a while, and people have been doing these grassroots communities and growing open science from the bottom up, and now we see more and more also top down decisions, which I think is a very good sign for quality of science, really.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, we'll get into some of the details of the initiatives a little later, maybe, but I thought maybe we could kick off by asking you what you thought of the official definition of open science that the US government has come up with, and for the benefit of people watching, that's in quotes, the principle and practice of making research projects, products and processes available to all while respecting diverse cultures, maintaining security and privacy, and fostering collaborations, reproducibility, and equity. So as definitions go, does that hit the mark for you, do you think?
Yeah, I think given that this is a federal definition, right, from the US, and they have to take so many opinions into account, I think it's a great definition. I also asked on social media what people thought about it, and I think the response generally was pretty good.
Yeah.
What I like especially is that they focus on collaboration, reproducibility, and equity, which aligns very much with how I personally see open science. So collaboration, it means I always think of the term building on the shoulders of giants, right? So this is what we want to do in research. We want to build on the work of others. They might be famous people, but they might also be our colleagues next door. And it's so important to take that into focus, and also reproducibility, just like this minimum standard in research quality, where we say when we have the same data and the same analysis, we also want to see the same results, and being able to check that from others is really, really important. And so I think this focus, I personally like it a lot.
Excellent, excellent. So can you tell me a little bit about your background and how you became interested and I think committed to open science would be a great way of describing it, right?
Yeah. So I'm a trained statistician. I studied statistics, and then how did I get into this whole open science thing was for me really through reproducible research. So my first research project was during my master's program, and we wrote a paper, and it was a very computationally complex project, and we had lots of files and folders and scripts and stuff like this. And then at some point it just all got so messy, and I felt like, oh no, I'm the worst scientist in the world. And then I told my colleague who I was working with on this project, and he was like, no, this is normal. And I was like, no, this can't be normal. I want to be on top of things when I do research, and I want to be sure that the code that I'm using for this is the correct code that I actually wanted to use, right? So that must be a minimum standard that we have. And so through that, I learned about reproducible research and good coding practices, and then also thought more and more about well, if I do all this, I should also publish it so that others can actually check that I'm doing good work here, right? And so through that, I got more and more into open science, and really always felt like that's the right thing to do, especially if you're funded through public money.
Yeah, yeah. Can I ask you what you think is kind of driving the shift to open science? Because the way you've described open science to me just there, that sounds like to me like just good scientific practice.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's not something that's been done before, I wonder whether is it like a cultural change, a philosophical change, a technological development that's kind of spurring this shift?
Yeah, so that's a really, really good and deep question. So on the back of my wall here in my office, I have written "Open science is just good science in a digital era," and I think that describes the answer to your question pretty well. So there was a technological change, right? Before we only had the printing press, and we had to print journals in order to distribute the knowledge that we have. And of course, that costs money. So journals cost money historically. But now journal costs are really super low because nobody needs them printed anyhow. And you only ever want to read like one or two articles out of one issue. So it doesn't really make sense anymore, right? And also publishing data and code, it's just like the cost is so low that now in this digital age of the internet, really, we have such a low burden of doing the right thing. But on the other hand, we need to make this social shift because we've been always like researchers have always done it a certain way, and there are especially certain fields that are really into like they feel like this is my data, this is my code, this is my research. Why should I share it? But I feel like the young generation of researchers are like, well, because it's the right thing to do. And the reason why we're in research is because we want to have scientific progress. And scientific progress comes when we can build upon each other's work.
Of course, yeah. And you mentioned obviously journal publications. Now, I wonder to an extent, is it that the scale of science has almost kind of outgrown the ability to kind of condense it all down into even if it's a 20 or 30 page academic paper, right? Because it's not just about, setting out the research question, describing the methods, presenting a table of the data. All that stuff can't be published now. Or it can be, but it can't be fit within the framework of an academic paper, right? It has to be on a GitHub repository or in a Jupyter notebook or something like that. So kind of open science encourages us to think about sort of distributing that knowledge in different ways.
I think that's completely true. So research now is so much more complex than it used to be, right? There used to be single researchers who did such breakthroughs within one paper. And now we already have so much knowledge and the questions are so much more detailed and complicated. And also the data is so much more, and the things that we can do is so much more complex. And so I feel like one paper isn't enough to describe the research that we're doing. And we did this one project with a group of students actually, and where we took 11 papers that were related to the topic that we're teaching about, and we took these 11 papers and data was available for the papers. And so we thought, well, we try to reproduce the results that they have there. And we found that it is really hard if we don't have the code, because the method section in papers is really super short, right? It's super short section if it's not like a statistics paper. And it's impossible to describe all the intricate steps that you took from the data to the complex model and analysis that you did. It's just not enough space within the paper. And the code is the perfect description of what you did, right? So why not publish it with it? And especially in cases where data privacy is not an issue, then and you already published the data, then it just makes so much sense to also publish the code, because the code is not like there's no privacy issues to that usually, at least.
Yeah. So is there a kind of okay, when we say open data science, what does that look like? And do you have a kind of example or a simplified example of what that would look like, right? And how it's more than just, the finished paper, the product, of the scientific process.
Yeah, so for me, open data science entails the process of the part of the scientific process that focuses on everything that happens on the computer. So the data processing and the data analysis, and then getting from the data analysis, getting the results and the knowledge really in sort of a pipeline where you go from one step to the next. And so what the image that I have in my head when I think about open data science, I really think of a pipeline where you stick the different parts of the pipeline together in a consecutive order. But of course, research projects are really complicated and the pipeline just looks really messy in some ways. But if you still manage to organize it in a way that the different bits all fit together, then you can make it so that in the end, you can imagine something that goes from the start to the finish, and you really understand every step of this pipeline, every step of the way, from the raw data to the paper.
Yeah. And so and the idea would be that people provide almost like a framework for you to recreate that yourself if you want to. Either check the results or replicate the process generally, right?
Yeah.
And so is your job now is, I guess, as an open science trainer and consultant. So are you the person that goes into organizations and kind of shows them how to build that pipeline or how to map it out and to present that to people?
Yeah, so what I do a lot is do workshops and trainings with PhD students. So graduate programs will ask me to come in for a day, or also we do longer trainings, which are often more useful because people can in between take the steps that I recommend. And then we just work together on ideas and steps that they can actually take. And I think what's always important there is to know that nobody's perfect from the beginning, and open science and reproducible research is really hard. And it requires a lot of technical knowledge. And I always feel like people are so scared because on one hand, they don't know how to do it yet. And the goal is so far away. And so I always you don't have to be perfect right away. Going one step into the right direction is super important. And that also helps with the social change, because then the question is, well, I do want to do this, but my supervisor doesn't know the technology. What do I do? And then we always try to find one step that they can take rather than trying to be perfect right away.
Yeah. And it's I guess it's encouraging to see, people like you being brought in to work with people on graduate programs. So we're trying to almost train the next generation of scientists to be thinking open science first, rather than, falling into bad habits or old habits that, we're trying to do away with.
Yeah, and really the young researchers, my feeling so far has been that the only pushback I get for my work is from established researchers who feel like, well, this is the way I did it, and so it has to be the right way. But the younger generation, for them, it's super obvious that this is the way we should go in order to achieve scientific progress and good scientific practice.
Yeah. A lot of data science now is obviously now done within industry. I wondered how open data science or open science principles fit in an environment, where competitive advantage is linked to, keeping things in-house and confidential and not wanting to share too much. Do you see a conflict there, or can the two work together?
So I think there's, first of all, I think if we get it done in academia, I'd be already super happy, right? If we get it done in a space where we have public funded projects that then are available for the public, I'd be already like super stoked. But in industry, it's really interesting because a lot of the work that is done in industry is already done pretty well. So if we think of, for example, companies, for example, like Microsoft, right? They put a lot of money right now into open source. They bought GitHub. They publish open source software. They put money into open source software projects like R, for example, right? So somehow this must be a good way of making profits as well. And we see lots of companies investing in open source. So why not think about other research products like data and so on, also in the same line as we do of open source, because software is just a similar product. And I don't think that there is some software or some products where it makes sense to have a patent or a trade secret or something. But sometimes it's just more profitable to have something where people can look into it and trust it. And it also helps like finding the next coders and the next researchers to work on these projects, because, well, we like looking into what we're going to do next, right? And also, if we look, for example, into pharma industry, there we see that a lot of the work they're doing is already pretty good. For example, if we look at clinical trial transparency, pharma is doing better than academia there. And also, they're pretty good on reproducible research because they have to stick to certain rules. And when we look on the other side, so industry also benefits from open science, right? Because if we do open science in academia and publicly funded projects, then this will help companies make more money because they have access to more knowledge and maybe interesting ideas as well that they don't have right now. So I think this is a win-win situation for companies as well. And I feel like if academia gives more to the industry, then eventually there will be like a mindset change, and industry will also give more back as well.
Yeah, I see what I can see that. And I guess it's, knowledge transfer is a big objective of a lot of academic institutions, right? We want our outputs to be of use to wider society, and that includes business and industry, right? So if people can pick those things up, download it off of the web without having to, make one-to-one links with the researchers who've done that project, it smooths that transition. That knowledge transfer becomes a lot more straightforward. You mentioned about open science is about public science, essentially putting these, when it's publicly funded research, this data and this work goes into the public space. I'm guessing that to a large extent, a lot of regular members of the public aren't going to be interacting with open science. They're not going to be downloading the data sets. They're not going to be rebuilding the pipelines and rerunning the analysis. But do you still see that there's a value there for the public in that information being there should they need it? And where are the kind of areas of value that you think the public will exploit?
Yeah, I think that's a interesting question. And I think the biggest answer to that is that we don't know what ideas people will have, right? There's so many skilled people out there that probably will do amazing things. And we see that over and over again when we put stuff out there, that people just get this super cool ideas. So we have this with the software Stable Diffusion right now, right? So that's an AI that generates images from text, and it runs on my computer here. And I don't need AI skills to be able to do that. And people are building such incredible images out of this, and it's really fun to see. So I think, we just don't know what's going to happen. And on the other hand, I think, I am a researcher, but I'm also the public, right? And so if I have a question about something that concerns my private life or my friend's private life, then I can also, I do have the skills to go into this and look at some research. For example, I don't know how to best raise children or whatever. So I have a friend, she's an epidemiologist, and she always goes and looks at research on like how to feed her child best and what to do. There's all kinds of questions you have as a mother, and she as a researcher can just go into the research and figure out like what is the best path for me to take. And I think the more we do open science, the more we can also do like science communication that adds on to that as well, right?
Yes,
so if we have her now, she could now help other mothers make the same good decisions as well. And she would be sort of a science communicator for research that isn't even hers. So that is pretty cool, I think.
I think so, and it speaks to me of breaking down silos that, and I guess blurring the lines between our roles as, our professional roles and our personal lives, right? It's about bringing science into that kind of public sphere, so I can see why the benefits would accrue from doing so. Just to wrap up, let's go back to that year of open science that was announced by the White House. Are there any other specific initiatives in that big long list that constituted the announcement that you're excited about?
Yeah, there's I think especially what I really liked was that federally funded research needs to be accessible, including the data when possible. So again, there's open when possible, closed when necessary. But I think this is a very good first step, is that to say, okay, it depends on the funding. If it's publicly funded, then it should also be publicly available. And I think that's a really good sign. And then also these, the statement had like mentioned all these open science initiatives in different fields, which I really liked. So for example, from NASA, they have this Transform to Open Science program, and they're already super active, and it's really cool to see what comes out of that. For medicine, they have a requirement for data management plans, which I think is a very solid step towards open science in medicine, because there we have the issue of data privacy, and we really have to think from the get-go of a project about what should we do in terms of best practices of data management, and having a requirement on that is, I think, a really, really solid step. And also thinking about open science in the field of like federal government even. So because open data in federal government is a huge topic, right? And that's definitely something that a lot of people will be interested in as well.
Last question for you then, Heidi. What would you want the lasting impact of an initiative like this to be? And, would you like to see this sort of thing replicated in other countries around the world? If indeed, other countries may already be doing this and have already done this.
Yeah. I think in general, it's a very, very good sign that we're seeing right now. We've seen lots of movement, for example, in the Netherlands. The Netherlands is really big on open science, and seeing such a big country that's also plays such an important role in the world, taking the step is a great sign for the entire, like all of research, really. And I think it's also nice to see that we're going from like, oh, this is a niche topic that only experts are interested in, and people that are like advocates and nerds focus on, to something that really governments are thinking about.
So open science is going mainstream.
Yes.
I think is the message there. And let's hope that it continues to do so. So Heidi, thank you very much for your time today. Where can people find you online if they want to find more about you and your work and your thoughts on open science?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful, and I always like talking about open science. So people can find me on my website, HeidiSeibold.com. And I'm also on Mastodon, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, wherever you search for Heidi Seibold, you'll find me.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, and thank you to those of you who are tuning in today. Make sure to check realworlddatascience.net for more interviews. Take care.